Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of The Shift, a year of living creatively with the reluctant gurus, myself, Shannon Wilson, and
Myself, Annmarie.
so this week we are back. We're kind of taking the lead from last week. If you listened, thanks so much. Please do keep on sending in your reactions and how you're finding what we're talking about. If you have any ideas for what you want us to talk about next as well. But if you listened, it was about death, around the topic of death, and we touched briefly on anxiety in that as well. So we decided this week we were going to talk about anxiety. It's something that, is more and more common now. I, I don't know whether anxiety itself is more common, but I think maybe even just through the knowledge of kind of symptoms of anxiety, we're becoming more aware of these feelings than we were years ago, and more able to be able to point at them and label them as anxiety. But definitely, I know, like in my circle of friends and people that I know, a lot of people suffer from some, if not all, of the symptoms of anxiety and in their daily lives, or even just ad hoc. I think most people at some stage in their life will be in a situation that will cause them anxiety. Our modern world, I think, has a lot of situations that cause anxiety, but even things like what we're doing right now, talking in front of a camera to people, can cause people a lot of anxiety to do something like that, from those sort of situational things to everyday anxiety of things you might just get anxiety about going about your daily life, going to the shop, interacting with people, having to go to the bank, um, even at work, having to do reports at work, having to speak to senior management. These are just examples from the top of my head of some of the situations that definitely at points in time have caused me anxiety. I have, starting off with this, I guess, a lot of personal experience with it. Having suffered anxiety most of my life since I was a teenager, and my family as well would have that history of anxiety. What about yourself, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I've definitely had maybe not long term, but there's definitely times in my life where I've been triggered by certain circumstances. We live in a very challenging society, and I think it's a very kind of individualist society. So we're often expected. There's a lot of expectations that we feel are placed upon us. We have to get the right job. We have to, we often have to look after ourselves financially, often emotionally. Sometimes many of us we live in a kind of more isolated society than we did in the past. I think I think the individual has like a lot of expectations placed upon themselves, and then with social media amplifying that, we fall into this comparison trap. We go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the young kids are on these days, and we see that these people, and they're living like these so potentially
Perfect.
perfect lives.
Yeah.
And I think I think there's a lot of kind of triggers in our modern
Mm,
world, uh, to
yeah.
causing like anxiety in people.
Definitely. I think you've touched on something really nice there, like this kind of the proliferation of communication in society has, the idea was to connect us all a lot more, and the pros are obviously fantastic, being able to communicate with people halfway around the world if they've gone away, or if you're living in a different country, to people that, friends or family or relationships or whatever. It's fantastic to be able to do that. On the flip side of that is that you're just being bombarded with so much information. I remember hearing, I think Jay Shetty was talking about this, a statistic that, like, we see more now in 24 hours of a day than we would have seen years ago in our entire lives, like the information overload. And that in itself is very anxiety inducing because how are you meant
Mm.
to process all of that? We're not built, our bodies are not built for that level of information. I think that's something, that's glossed over a lot in terms of progress in society. Like, we're told this is great, these things are happening and this is going to make your life easier. But at the same time, like, we're not really given the opportunity to actually take stock and adjust to these new developments. And like, I mean, in our lifetimes in particular, being in our sort of early mid 30s, there there's been so much change. I still remember like when the internet was first becoming available, and it was like, oh my goodness, we have so much information. It's fantastic. We can discover all this stuff. But like there was never any like classes to teach us how to research through the internet properly, what to trust, what not to trust. um so it was just a lot of information. That's stuck in my head so much. And I think there's no escaping that sort of constant barrage of information. Because I know yourself, Annmarie, and this is a good thing for us to talk about actually. Like, you have very good boundaries in terms of when you switch off your phone, like how you engage with social media, and the internet. So maybe tell us a bit about that and like why you put those into place and how you feel they help you.
I think I'm the kind of person who I'm always going through stages, so I'm not solid in saying that all of the time I have very good boundaries. But yeah, there have been times that like I have made a huge effort to just kind of like put my phone away.
Mhm.
And there was a period I remember during lockdown where like I remember that I just felt like I couldn't keep, because during lockdown we were very isolated. And then I think, well, for me, or a lot of us perhaps, for me, I was often like always on my phone.
Mhm.
And I was like, of course, like it was nice to have, I was connecting with people in different parts of the world, my friends, and like it was really nice. But I don't know, there was still something very anxiety inducing about that. I realized at one stage, and like, of course I love these people, and like it wasn't that like I didn't want to like stay in touch with them, but there was something so isolating about the fact that we were communicating yet we were very much alone, like we weren't
Yeah.
together. And I kind of made this period where like I didn't go on my phone for like 2 or 3 months, and like and it was also during lockdown, so I also wasn't really seeing anybody. And like I think I emailed a few people and maybe arranged some like Zoom calls on my computer. And I was like using the internet, I was working on the
Mhm.
internet, but I wasn't using social media, I wasn't using my phone unless it was like a scheduled Zoom call, which I
Mhm.
didn't do a lot of. Yeah, I remember one of my cousins, because we had like lockdown level 1 to 4
Mhm.
in Ireland. I think it was a 1 to 4. And then one of my cousins was joking when I was telling her all this that I was on like lockdown level 5. And I was also like calling her with candles in my room like that evening. She was like, "What's going on? Like not going on your phone, like with your candle lit back in the Stone Age." But I actually found that like it really helped my anxiety at that time. Like, of
Mhm.
course, there were lots of things to deal with. I think that like that whole thing of like being connected
Mhm.
but alone is like um
Mhm.
yeah, like I don't think we kind of realize what it's doing to us. Like we're not in the physical presence of people, and we're waiting for a WhatsApp message to kind of like brighten
Mhm.
up our evening or whatever. But there's just so much value to like sitting in a room with people, as
Mhm.
opposed to, and again, sometimes like the internet and all of these things, it can add value to our life if we use it correctly. But yeah, if we're depending on like our Facebook notifications or like our likes on Instagram to give us like kind of a little dose of happiness, then that's anxiety inducing for sure.
Yeah.
That's definitely something I've noticed in myself, and that's why I try to create those boundaries. I don't always succeed with them, but, like, when I do, like, I do feel a good bit better, and,
Mm.
um, yeah, when I'm able to, like, cut off, create some limitations. It doesn't have to be like not using my phone for 2 months, but if it's like stop using my phone at like 7 p.m., then it's just so much more calming. There's something nice about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely understand. And I think trying it is half the battle, like what we are always talking about in these conversations and in our general conversations is like life is a journey, like it's not a destination, and we are gonna get better at some things and then take two steps backwards and then try again. And that's why so many people fall off the horse, so to speak, in terms of exercise or whatever, because they have a bad day or a bad week and then they think, oh, I'll just leave it. I can't do it again. It's a very, it's a sort of self-preservation thing, because like we're beating ourselves up about it, so we don't want to like look at it. But actually, like in terms of like what you said there, you're putting in these boundaries, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and having that sort of self-knowledge is really important, and keeping on trying with it and seeing what works for you, maybe adjusting it depending on your state of mind or what you're going through at the moment. And something you touched on there in terms of these kind of like waiting for messages, it remind me of like a big cause of anxiety, is this obligation. I don't know what way to phrase it, obligation ethics or whatever. Like, I guess back from when we were sort of in small societies of 100 people, 150 people, that's what they reckon anyway. We would have had a lot of obligations on us, social obligations in terms of our role in that society, and that we had to fulfill for everything to work. And I think like we still have a lot of that inside us, this kind of obligation when someone texts
Mhm.
us. it
Yeah,
it
definitely.
ties, yeah, it ties so much into that. It's like, oh, I have to get back to them, or I'm a bad person, or if I'm leaving somebody on red for so long, and then on the other side of that, waiting for the person, it's like, why haven't they got back to me? Like the anxiety that comes with that, of like, I know I'm guilty of thinking, God, are they okay? Like, has
Or
something
like
happened to them? Yeah.
or like online dating when the
Yeah,
anxiety caused, oh, I met this guy, he messaged, or just normal, all of that stuff.
exactly. And that has to be one of the biggest ones, because it comes back to trying to like read people as well, like, which is a big cause of anxiety. Like, for instance, I've just started like a new contract. For those of you who don't know, I'm working for myself at the moment, so I'm working on like lots of different contracts, and I've just started a new one. And I've noticed in myself like how much anxiety and stress I have the first couple of weeks of that. Um, Partially because it's been a really long time since I've gone into a new working environment, an office environment, and had a new boss. It's been a really, really long time, been like 5 years or something. Um, there's that, but it's because the anxiety is coming from trying to read other people in that situation. So trying to figure out, like, my mind is working overtime trying to figure out what my boss wants from me in terms of how she wants me to behave. Like, does she want me to be like I really like um sort of proactive, just getting on with things employee? Does she want me to be like running everything through her? Like, what are the good questions to ask? What questions doesn't she like? Like, and that gives me so much anxiety. And I remember being told before, through, because I go to therapy. It's something, I've been doing for over 2 years now. And it really helps me in terms of managing my anxiety. Having someone to soundboard things off of, sometimes even just speaking it out loud helps, even if the other person doesn't have much input. So talk therapy can really help. But something that like she was saying was that we're basically, if you're constantly trying to read people, it comes from back from childhood or situations where you had a person in your life that was kind of like up and down, not consistent with their reactions to you. And it's a kind of trauma response that a lot of us get into because a lot of us, as well, we're exposed to more people now. The likelihood we're going to come across someone who is unpredictable in their everyday reactions is a lot higher. And that is actually like a trauma thing. If you get anxiety around people and you're trying to read them all the time because you're trying to negate that situation happening, or you might get in trouble, or something might have gone wrong. And that's something I'm really trying to work on at the moment, with my therapist as well, looking at my reactions to people and how I change myself around certain people in order to sort of make my life a bit easier. But that in itself doesn't help me because I have the anxiety to do it. It only helps maybe the other person, maybe it doesn't because I'm not being myself or being my true self around them. Um, so something I've been trying to do is interrupt that response. And I think like this is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something that's very good for you if you do have anxiety, even looking up cognitive behavioral therapy. Basically noticing when anxiety happens in your life, and then when it happens, interrupting the thought that comes through, stopping it and changing it. So whether that be something as simple as, and this can be for anything, it doesn't have to be anxiety. So just say like you have really negative like self appearance, you're worried about the way that you appear. If you have a thought when you look in the mirror, which is like, oh, I look ugly, it's as simple as taking that thought and redirecting it. So like finding something that you find beautiful about yourself and stating that instead, um, or the opposite way to do it, the other way to do it is to take that thought and question it and be like, but why? Like, why that I look ugly? I thought. So just putting that at the end of the sentence, it distances you from the thought. So that's a couple of different ways that I find helpful that are common cognitive behavioral therapy approaches to anxiety and negative sort of thoughts that you might be having. Do you have any sort of thoughts from your side, Annmarie, in terms of managing anxiety in your day-to-day life?
Um, I have a few. I think it always depends. I know, like, and maybe for you as well, there's been a few times in my life, like when my anxiety was just at an all-time high.
Mhm.
And I felt it was very uncontrollable. So I think there's different ways. Of course, people go to doctors to deal with anxiety if they're really suffering a lot. I know for me, we spoke once in our one of our previous podcasts, we spoke about meditation.
Mhm.
That's something that's always helped me. Like I practice a form of meditation called Vipassana meditation, which I find very beneficial. And I know that, there's all kinds of different meditations out there. And I've spoke with other people who do different types and they find it helpful for them. I also just think generally like creating a routine in your life is very
Mhm.
helpful. Committing to doing, the basic things of like, exercise, eating right, yes, getting in your sleep and everything. Yeah, different things help different people, and talking to friends or
Mhm.
family if you have supportive friends or family. And like you said, you go to a therapist, and a lot of people today find therapy like very helpful. So I think there's no one size fits all approach. There never will be
Yeah,
for anything. Yeah, but there's so
exactly.
many
Yeah.
ways, and you have to, and I guess all that thing of like you're not alone, right? Like there's
Mm.
so many people out there going through what you're going through, and sometimes that can be helpful to know that, and you can find help based on that.
Mm. I think like taking stock of when anxiety occurs for you is really important. So first of all, maybe keeping like a journal or some way of writing down when you feel anxiety to have a look back over, because anxiety is such a catch-all term. It like people suffer anxiety in so many different ways that like being like exactly what you just said, there's no one way to fix it or one way to deal with it or one way to try and make yourself feel better because anxiety is not the same for everyone. So figuring out when it's happening, seeing a pattern there. Um, and sometimes it's as well looking broader than just like, okay, I have anxiety this day. What was I doing at that moment? It may be that the day before, like you were saying, Annmarie, like you didn't get enough sleep, you didn't eat well, and then you had the day after you had really bad anxiety. So it's kind of looking more broadly rather than very specifically at a moment sometimes. Um, and in terms of going to therapy, just something I want to put out there because like so many people have as well this fear around therapy, whether it's they just think it's not going to work, it won't work for me, or they've had an experience where they've gone to a therapist and they just feel like it didn't help at all. Finding the right therapist is so important, and I think that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like I was having a conversation with my friend the other day and she was saying to me, God, I can't believe like you researched the therapists before you went to them. She was like, I just Googled therapist and like picked the first one. And I was like, yeah, like that's pretty important to know what type of therapist you're going to and what they deal with. Is it something that once you've analyzed where your anxiety is coming from, that they're going to be able to help you with? Um,
Mhm.
and also just the type of person it is, it's the same as like remember you're also like it's not just the therapist has to accept you, it's also like you have to accept the therapist because sometimes you might be speaking to someone you're not comfortable with them or you feel like the responses aren't helping you or the way that they deal with it isn't right for you. All of that can add into your experience. So if you do decide to go down that route, I just say be open to trying a few therapists and do your research beforehand into what type of therapist and what style they have as well. But in terms of everyday anxiety, like it does suck. It sucks to have anxiety. It's really difficult, and sometimes you don't know, even though you put in all these different ways of helping you deal with it, you still have episodes of it where you don't know where it's come from. So, like you were saying, it is a thing of trying to put in these routines and these things to help you, but also adjusting them as you go along, because depending on what's going on in your life will depend on how your anxiety is and what you're dealing with. So, is there anything else you'd like to add, Annmarie?
We also have some meditations that I recorded for our channel,
Yeah.
and they're nice, relaxing. So they might be beneficial to you. There's some focused on kind of releasing and letting go of worry. So listening to something like that might help you when you're facing anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. And like just that's a brilliant point as well. Like worry, like anxiety can be really focused. So focusing on doing a meditation like that, it's sometimes just getting your mind off the thing. That really helps. And maybe, yeah, just have a go at the meditations and tell us what your routines are like and what you do to cope with anxiety in daily life and triggers. And we will speak to you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.